Well, thank you for joining us for this event. My name is Bill Leggett, and I'm a bookseller at Powell's. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. One of the many great events we're looking forward to is Steve Olson in conversation with Tom Carpenter, which takes place tomorrow, August 3rd. They'll talk about Olson's new book, The Apocalypse Factory, Plutonium, and the Making of the Atomic Age. Please consider following us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. As well, if you haven't already done so, please sign up for our weekly events email at powells.com. Right now, we're honored to welcome Stephanie Scott, author of What's Left of Me Is Yours, in conversation with Margaret Malone. Stephanie Scott is a Singaporean and British writer who was born and raised in Southeast Asia. Stephanie was awarded a British Association of Japanese Studies Toshiba studentship for her anthropological work on today's book, and has been made a member of the British Japanese Law Association as a result of that research. An early draft of the manuscript also won the A.M. Heath Prize and the Jerwood Arvin Prize for prose fiction. This is her first novel. The novel, What's Left of Me Is Yours, is set in modern-day Tokyo and inspired by a true crime that captured the world's attention in 2010. A tale of love and murder, and based on 9 years of intricate research, it follows a young woman's search for the truth about her mother's life and the affair that shattered a family. Stephanie is joined in conversation today by Margaret Malone, author of the story collection People Like You, finalist for the Hemingway Award, and winner of the Balcones Fiction Prize, an associate fiction editor at West Trade Review, and a co-host of the artist and literary gathering Share. Margaret lives in Portland, Oregon. This event will also include an audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. As well, if someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, please consider upvoting that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. And most importantly, please consider supporting both Stephanie and Powell's by purchasing a copy of What's Left of Me Is Yours. A link to buy the book will be shared in the chat. Stephanie, Margaret, thanks for joining us and have a great event.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here with me. It's such a pleasure. So this is your gorgeous book. This is what it looks like. It's such a, I mean, I wrote in an email to you and just said, but it's just such a beautiful marriage of lyricism and also concise language, which I feel like is this incredible, it's just the perfect little nugget when you want to sit down and read. And it's about something that is so compelling and human at the same time. It's one of those strange things. It's very understandable how it happened and yet terrible. And those things make it for a truly like impossible to read is something that is sort of people throw around, but truly it's impossible to put down, So thank you so much for writing it. It's just beautiful.
Thank you so much, Margaret. And thank you so much for being here with me. It's such a pleasure to speak with you.
It is my pleasure as well. Thank you. I have so many questions for you, as you know, but before I launch into them all, I would really love for everyone who's here to get a chance to hear the book and the lyricism for themselves and what it sounds like. So if you would, I'd love for you to read for just a short time. That would be great.
Sure. No, that would be my pleasure. I have my copy here. I'll just read to you from the prologue, which is obviously the very beginning of the book. So there are no spoilers, as it were, and then we can all be on the same page. So, what's left of me is yours. Prologue. Sarashima is a beautiful name, a name that now belongs only to me. I was not born with it, this name, but I have chosen to take it because once it belonged to my mother. It is customary upon meeting someone to explain who you are and where you come from. But whether you realize it or not, you already know me, and you know my story. Look closely. Reach into the far corners of your mind and sift through the news clippings, bulletins, tabloid crimes tucked away there. You will see me. I am the line at the end of an article. I am the final sentence, ending with a full stop. Wakaresaseya Agent Goes Too Far by Yu Yamada, published at 6:30 p.m. on the 16th of May, 1994. The trial of Kaitarō Nakamura, the man accused of murdering Rina Satō, began today at the Tokyo District Court. The case has attracted international attention due to the fact that the defendant, Nakamura, is an agent in the wakaresaseya, or so-called marriage breakup industry, and has admitted that he was hired by the victim's husband, Osamu Satō, to seduce his wife, Rina Satō, and provide grounds for divorce. Nakamura claims that he and the deceased fell in love and were planning to start a new life together. If convicted of murder, he faces a minimum 20-year prison sentence. The judges may even consider the death penalty. Rina Satō's father, Yoshi Sarashima, told reporters, "A business such as this, which destroys people's lives, should not be allowed to operate in Tokyo. Rina was my only child and the heart of our family. I shall never get over her loss, nor forgive it. Rina Satō is survived by a daughter of 7 years old." Can you remember when you first read this? Were you at home at your breakfast table, or in the office scanning the morning news? I can see your face as you read about my family. Your brows drew together in a slight frown. A crinkle formed above your nose. Perhaps the smell of coffee was strong and reassuring in the air, for eventually you shook your head and turned the page. The world is full of strange things. Wakaresaseya was not common in Japan when Kaitarō was drawn into my mother's life. The industry emerged out of a demand for its services, a demand that exists all over the world today. Look at the people around you, those you love, those who love you, those who want what you have. They can enter your life as easily as he entered mine. Do you know now when we first met, or where? Was it in the Telegraph, the New York Times, Le Monde, the Sydney Morning Herald? My story stopped there in the foreign press. Later articles focused on the marriage breakup industry itself and the agents who populate it, but none of them mentioned me. Lives to be rebuilt are always less interesting than lives destroyed. Even in Japan, I disappeared from the page.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So my first question is, and I feel like I kind of know the answer, but I could be wrong, but I'm curious what I always call a conduit character, which of the characters was your way in to this story? And, that sort of fired your imagination. And I'm curious which of the characters, if anyone came along that was more unexpected that you didn't see coming, or how that changed as you were writing.
That's a great question, and I have to say my conduit character was Sumiko. It's part of the reason I wanted to read the prologue, actually, because the prologue is the first part of the book that I wrote 10 years ago, and it has remained with me and in the novel, I think, because Sumiko's voice was the first one I heard, and it was so strong and prevalent, and she had so many opinions and also so many questions. I really wondered how it would be if this crime had occurred in your family, how you would be raised, and the impact that would have on you, and would you be told? And of course, Sumiko at the beginning of the novel, she doesn't know the truth of how her mother died. She believes it's a car accident. This has been kept from her whole life until there is a phone call, a catalyst that mentions Kaitarō Nakamura, the lover who is imprisoned for the murder. And she then goes on a voyage of discovery. And so she was very much the backbone of the novel. And she held the structure of it together from the beginning. And it was very interesting to go on a journey with her because she's a young lawyer and there's so much Japanese law in the book. I really wanted to be true to the legal system as it exists, and the culture. And so she was a wonderful way in many, many ways. And I suppose characters that were surprising. I think one of my favorite characters is the murder victim, Rina. And it really struck me when I was reading the article for the first time and writing my own version of it, that, the way in which we can become really desensitized to these stories in the press when we read them, and they're actually very real human stories, and women tragically die this way all over the world all the time, and we can become inured, which struck me as a huge shame. And what I wanted to do was not merely create a character who could be summarized or who had been summarized, but a woman and her life and her choices and everything that had led up to that moment. And it must be said that my character is entirely fictional, and very much of my own imagination. But this is why she came out of nowhere, because I had to build her from the ground up and really get to know her. You know, I knew her daughter, Sumiko, very, very, very quickly. But Rina took a lot of time and was really unexpected. And she's probably my favorite, if I'm allowed to have one of those.
You're definitely allowed to have favorites. That happens whether you want them to or not, I think. I'm in your biography, it says that you were awarded like an anthropological fellowship or studyship over in Japan. And so can you talk, what were you studying? Were you studying the legal system in Japan for the book, or what was that? What was going on exactly?
Cool. It was actually, so I won that award based on my research proposal for the novel, which outlined the fieldwork, the anthropological fieldwork that I would do in Japan, and all the aspects of the culture that I would be investigating, and also the legal work that I would then do. And I was actually in the I suppose at the beginning of writing the novel, in the first couple of, I suppose I was in the second, third year of it. And I applied for this award, which is normally given to postgraduate anthropologists. Actually, they don't normally give it to novelists. but I wanted to apply, and I outlined my research and wrote it all up. And they were kind enough to support my work and give me this grant, which funded my travel in Japan, and that was really amazing to receive. And I'm still a bit baffled to have received it, and very honored too.
Yeah, well, I want to use the word authenticity, which doesn't seem like it applies perfectly, but it's just so alive. All the elements are so real and alive. And before we go much further, I would love for you to talk just briefly about wakaresaseya. I hope I'm saying that correctly. What is that? Like, for people who don't know and aren't familiar, talk a little bit about what an agent is in Japan, what they do, and how that works with the culture in Japan, how common that is.
Sure. Well, the wakaresaseya are, it literally means breaker-upper. They are relationship breaking up agents, and they work in a variety of different roles, but for the purposes of this story, they can be hired by a spouse. If you want to divorce your partner, but you want a greater portion of your financial assets or custody of your children, you can hire someone to seduce your partner and provide you with grounds for divorce, such as infidelity, adultery, or just to give you the upper hand in the divorce proceedings. You know, actually, very few divorce cases end up going to court. So it's about, I suppose, scaring your partner out of litigation and giving yourself an upper hand and a stronger position. And also, there's currently only sole custody of children in Japan. Joint custody is illegal. So the stakes, particularly for the children in a divorce situation, are high, and for the parents as well, obviously. So there are a number of different approaches to divorce, and you can have a divorce by mutual consent. It's very liberating, actually. You can just go down to the local ward office and you can both sign a form and you're divorced. You know, it's extremely quick, but you have to decide the terms of that divorce yourselves, and you have to agree it. And isn't that where so many of these things fall apart? So the wakaresaseya can give you an edge. And they also are attached to private detective agencies. So if you suspect that your spouse is cheating, they can do a stakeout operation. Sometimes they do many different kinds of jobs and roles. more recently they've started to talk about bringing people back together. So if you've lost touch with your childhood sweetheart, but you would really like to find them again and reignite the passion, they say they will assist you in that way. And also, I mean, I think if there are young women who are having an affair with a married man and they want him to leave his wife, or his wife to leave him so that they can marry him, you know, the wakaresaseya will approach the wife. So there are, you know, one would expect that it's beautiful young women approaching middle-aged men in bars, but there's so much more to it than that, and so many more angles and variations that this can be seen from.
Wow. And is it accepted? Like how like is it considered inappropriate to use a wakaresaseya there, or is it no one would talk about doing it, or is it just part of culture that it happens sometimes?
That's a very good question, actually. And it's really, by its very nature, the industry has to be quite covert. So it's not accepted, really. If you think of the way that we would regard honey trapping or entrapment generally in our societies, it's quite strange. I think even to have a family friend or a family member use a private detective is quite unusual, I think. Certainly in our own lives, it's quite odd when that comes up, but it does occur, and it's very similar in Japan in that it's covert and under the radar, and very much, I think, a lot of the agents are there. When I've spoken to them, they've said that there isn't so much of a culture of seeking help for mental health, or it's not quite as accepted to see a therapist, and so when you can't turn to your family, when you can't turn to your friends, when there's a great deal of shame or personal baggage attached to your situation, who do you go to? And so one of the men I spoke to said that he actually feels quite like a psychologist a lot of the time. Which is, it's a very difficult industry. It's obviously a very morally conflicted industry, and it's extremely nuanced and complex. But that is, I suppose, one of the more positive aspects. But I also found it very interesting.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating. I mean, it's one of the. It's terrible, and it's like awful, and like you can't help but lean in at the same time.
Yes,
because it is so strange and so understandable why that exists. It's so understandable. It's so human.
So they're almost, I think, a port of last resort. If you're isolated and you don't know where to turn and you don't know who to go to, they exist.
Yeah, as I was reading your book and then just really kind of sitting and chewing on that job, it really, the thing that blew me away the most was that it's not more prevalent. It's like just the idea of purposeful sabotage, I guess, basically is what it is. Emotional life sabotage. It's said a lot to me about us as humans that it's not more prevalent. It was like, okay, we do still, we're okay. Because I understand we've all been hurt so many times in so many ways. Of course, the easiest thing is to then get what you want back, however you can. So yeah, it's a fascinating job.
That was really what interested me as well. I think the way in which honey trapping and all of these various forms of relationship manipulation do exist all around the world in different forms. And it's particularly fascinating in America, where you have very complex prenups and there's a lot of maneuvering pre-marriage, let alone during and post-marriage. So it would be really interesting. I think this does actually require an anthropological study. If someone could do that, I would love to read it.
Whoever's listening, here's your PhD dissertation. We are offering it to you now.
Let's go.
One of my other questions, which I feel like is going to be born right from what we're talking about, is because the book takes place in Japan, obviously the country and their culture is going to influence the story. And I'm really curious if within that framework, were there constraints that you had to adhere to, that if it took place in another country, you feel like the story could have gone in a different direction? I'm fascinated how the culture influenced the writing and revision of the story.
Oh, definitely. I think the key element for me when writing this novel was learning about Japanese law. It had been suggested to me at the outset that I could potentially lift the concept and the plot and move it elsewhere. And I didn't really want to do that. I actually felt that I wanted to honor the setting and the circumstances, and so that actually required a very deep dive into Japanese law, which began very early on in the novel from the get-go. And I was very lucky enough through the various grants and supports to go to Tokyo and to work with a number of defense attorneys there and prosecutors. I'm not a lawyer. You mentioned in our email conversation, you asked if I'd ever trained in law. I actually haven't. My degrees are in literature. Although my grandmother was a lawyer, I come from a family of lawyers, and I think it was their secret desire that I become one too. So that's where my interest began. But I worked very closely with a number of defense attorneys, prosecutors, and they really helped me understand the law in Japan and also how it has developed over various decades, because there are a number of characters in the novel who are lawyers who have experienced it at various different time periods. And so it wasn't merely understanding the legal situation as it is today, but also how it has evolved. And definitely when I was speaking with those lawyers, there were plot points and elements of discovery where Sumiko is getting hold of the case file, where they, I had suggested, well, can she get it this way? And, they would say, no, that's totally inappropriate. It's just unforgivable. No lawyer would do that. No lawyer, no prosecutor. And so I had to find ways around that and sort of give them suggestions. And they were like, well, that's plausible. I think that was my bottom line. Is it plausible? Could it happen? And they were like, this is still very naughty. And I was like, I understand. So definitely it was really wonderful and empowering, because it brought so much to the story and the themes and the characters. It really instigated so many interesting issues about justice and legal systems and how they operate and how we function as people, and how these systems serve us. So it brought a huge amount to the table, but it was a fascinating constraint as well. Because I really wanted to be true to it. So
yeah, and you were. I mean, it feels that's part of the beauty of the novel, is how it's truth. It just is simmering with like authenticity and truth to the characters and the culture. Yeah. So you're talking about research. I can't help but ask, because I'm sure there are writers who are listening, clearly there was a lot of research involved. So what did you learn balancing out doing research, turning that into writing? I'd love to hear maybe something you feel like you would have done differently, knowing what you know now in terms of research and integrating that into writing. That's such a conundrum for so many writers.
It really is. I guess what I would have loved was for the book to have come together faster. I think it took several years. I would really like to find the key to writing more quickly, and probably condensing the research period. For me, I never really stopped researching, actually. And there were various issues which are evolving today. I mean, for example, joint custody is currently being explored in Japan. The Ministry of Justice are undertaking a sort of an investigation as to whether it would suit. There's been much campaigning against sole custody. So there were things that I had to keep track of constantly. So I never really stopped researching, but I guess what I did was I worked in phases of very intense research, and then there does come a point where you have to put it behind and the story has to live and breathe and actually be the dominant feature. It is fiction that I love, and fiction that we're writing. So I did definitely have to focus solely on story and characterization and structure. for a great deal of the time. And then it is quite an uncomfortable feeling, because you've accumulated all of this information. You have to put it down and almost really put it behind you, because you cannot write a textbook, you cannot write a treatise. And even though it's terrifying, because, you know, you're second guessing yourself all the time, you know, I would have like horrible moments where I imagined that a professor in Japanese law was reading it. And I was like, I have to put in all the caveats, and I have to really encapsulate the complexity. But I mean, also fiction is predominant, and I have a little post-it on my TV, on my computer screen, that says just that. You know, the fiction must rule above all. So it was finding that balance. But if I could do it faster, if I could find a way to do it faster, I'd be very grateful.
Yeah, if you get that recipe, will you let me know too? Because that would be very useful. How long did it take? How long did it take from the time you started until it was picked up?
Oh, until it was picked up. So it took 8 years until it was picked up. And I did have some time off from writing in the middle of that, various sort of family traumas, and, you know, life will always get in the way. We just have to fight it. I wonder if our role as authors is just one of continual struggle. But yes, 8 years until I sent it out. And I guess I was very lucky to have agent interest early on in the manuscript. And what I decided, I was given very good advice on the Faber novel program, where they said, you know, we don't care how long the book takes, we just care that it's ready when it's sent out. And I obviously took that to an extreme. But I did do that. I did work on it for many years on my own, making sure that it was where I wanted it to be. And then I sent it out to all the agents who'd expressed interest over those years at the same time. And they picked it up very quickly, and then it sold, and then there was still more work to be done. Yeah. Yes. But 10 years, actually, it's 10 years from, you know, me conceiving of the idea to publication.
Wow. Yeah. It takes a long time. I feel like that's common. That 10-year window for debuts is common. Yeah. I'm curious how the structure changed over time. So the way it is now, if you've not read the book yet, is it's told by multiple points of view, and the sections are sometimes separated out. And so we have Subiko, who sometimes has her own section, and then we have the couple they sort of share sections. So I'm just curious, in the flow, how did the structure change over time, or did it feel pretty solid when you went in, or was it something that was, you know, revealed itself slowly?
I think I knew what I wanted to achieve with it from the beginning. It was quite an organic process. I had a lot of beta readers at the end when I'd finished the manuscript, but at the beginning, when it was in development, I really didn't show it to very many people. Strangely though, one of my mentors, when she encountered a very early, you know, the early sections of the novel, and she was like, this is an ambitious structure, and I think she was challenging it. She was like, I'm not sure, you know, is the reader going to want to hop about quite so much? I mean, it's pretty linear, as you say. It's Sumiko going back in time to discover her mother's relationship and the love affair, and how her mother died, and what really, really happened. But, you know, I think the chapters, as you mentioned earlier, I really like to write concisely. So the chapters are short, and the prose is concise and loaded, and the fact that the chapters are short means that you move quite quickly through the narrative, and so the pace is there. And I was actually just determined to have the interlocking narratives and the different points of view on the same events right from the beginning. So I was just determined, actually, and I have to say that the structure really helped me, because it was incredibly organic. I did it very much by feel. I don't think I didn't sit down with a chart and decide rigidly, you know, that I was going to do 20,000 words here and then 20,000 words there. I really went solely on feel. And there was a moment when I was writing when I laid out the whole manuscript. This is coming towards the end of the first draft. I laid it all out on my living room floor and walked the novel, and decided at that point, you know, what to cut, what to accentuate, where the joins were, when to speed it up. And so that was a very strange process based largely on gut instinct and emotion.
That's so fascinating to me, because I feel like structure, especially for a novel, is one of those things that is often very much struggled with, which is one of the reasons I really wanted to ask that question, is because in the reading of your book, even though, as I talk about it, I know it maybe sounds unexpected that we're following one person and then another, and it's mostly chronological, though we go a little bit back and forth, it weaves a little bit, but it does, as you're reading it, feel wholly integrated and essential that it's done that way, because we're always reminded of the importance of one set of characters to the other. They don't exist in and of themselves. That's not really what the story is. The story is how they interrelate, even though it's happening over a span of time. And so the structure of it makes it land, you know, even deeper in the heart of the reader. So it worked. Like, yes, thank you for following your instinct, because it's so effective on the page. Yeah, it was just lovely.
Thank you. I don't know if you find this with your writing, but it's almost like it becomes a living thing. I'm going to sound deranged now. Where you feel like it's you know, it tells you, really. I think it does in a way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's the great thing about taking our time as writers, is it allows us to listen to that, for that to be okay, for us to let the book lead.
Yes, and it does. That too takes a huge amount of time. I mean, I did actually have large periods where I would put it in a drawer and then go off and read research and do other things, and not look at the prose, because I needed to come back to it with fresh eyes. And there was a lot of settling that needed to occur. And even when I was editing with my editor at Doubleday, who is amazing, and you are then editing to significant time pressure. I'd probably work on lots of different scenes in a day, but I'd have to work on one, put it on the floor and be like, I will be back with you in 48 hours. And then I would work on something else. And it was just constantly rotating back to try and get the freshest eyes I could have.
Yeah, which is essential. Yeah, I feel like that part it's essential. You can't just push it through to have it done. It's not.
No, you can't rush it. So
yeah. Well, kudos. it worked. So in just a few minutes, we'll open it up and go through some questions. But I have something else I just wanted to ask about, was two of the recurring themes that I noticed that are, I want to say obvious, but they feel so much richer than that. One is this idea of lies, which is so interesting to me. When I was, you know, putting together my thoughts of what I wanted to ask you about, you know, I didn't jot down that one of the themes was about truth. I jotted down that it's about lies. And it was only in really considering that after the fact that I thought, well, that's so silly, because truth and lies are, well, we're dealing with the same thing. So why did I jot down like lies? Who do we lie to? Why do we lie to them? When do we lie? That really became a theme and was so fascinating to me, and made me wonder why we're always leaning harder into like the truth and what is the truth, when really the deep complexity of most stories and being a human has to do with who and when we choose to lie to. So I was really fascinated by this theme about lying, and also the sort of malleable term of justice, which obviously in America right now is on everybody's mind. So I don't know, do what you will with those two. Those are big questions, but I'm so curious about your thoughts on both those.
I love that point. And I think it was very integral to the way in which I visualize narrative, particularly the narratives we tell ourselves. You were asking earlier about the title of the novel, What's Left of Me Is Yours. It has, it's written into the novel, and it has tremendous resonance to all aspects of the novel. But it wasn't the original title. The original title of the novel was The Sentence. which, you know, I understand why they made me change it. I do, I completely understand. But for me, the sentence, you know, particularly because Sumiko is the final sentence in an article, there are judicial sentences and implications in the book, and also just the sentences and the stories that we tell ourselves, and the narratives we construct around that. I think that was why lying and the fluidity of these narratives was so fascinating to me, because they are extremely fluid. And, you know, people decide what they've experienced constantly. And there is, by necessity, I suppose, a gap between what they've experienced, what they decide they've experienced, and what actually happened, and how that impacted on other people and how they experienced it. So I'm very interested in these gray areas of definition and existence.
Yeah, I think so many writers are, you know, that's,
yeah, it's our bread and butter, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and there's so much in there, you know, that's the sort of beauty, is we get to talk about, I don't know, we get to live in those, you know, it's often called the liminal spaces, but there's so much in there. I feel like most of life happens in those places, and we just construct these walls of like.
Absolutely, and you say that, you know, we are always on a path to find the truth. You know, what is the truth? And we want to pin it down and define it, and we want a sort of beacon that we can rally around. But the truth is fluid as well, and it will vary depending on whose eyes it is seen from. So it's not a definable thing. I think we try to define it all the time.
Yeah. I'm going to turn briefly to a couple of the Q&A questions, and then I have hopefully a couple more I can get to. So people are very interested in the concept of, so one person is calling it like sugar mamas and sugar daddies, the sugar babies in Japan. So someone just wants to just talk a little bit more about that. And then the sort of follow-up question to that, which is from someone else, which is interesting, is if you have any indication if more men or women are seeking out the services of the breaker-uppers?
That's a very good question. If I might address that one first.
Yes.
It's actually quite evenly split. You know, I think we bring a lot of preconceptions to the industry and imagine that there would be a certain kind of client, but actually both sexes do use it. And there are, you know, as I said earlier, I think there's the initial stereotype of the beautiful woman engaging the aging middle-aged man in the bar who suspects nothing. And there is a bit of a joke actually that men are more susceptible, that they just don't question as much, and that women question constantly. So men find it unsurprising when dazzling young women approach women pass. Of course, this makes complete sense.
I'm not touching that.
Yeah. But there are male agents, and you know, there are clients who need the woman to be the subject of the seduction. And what's interesting, I think, with them is that, yes, women question constantly. And that was very key for me in the novel, because Rina is, she's very traditional. She's agreed to a marriage and she believes in it. And she's really going to stick it out. She's not used to people flirting with her really either, which is part of I suppose the mental and physical state she's allowed herself to descend into. But she questions continually. And I was very interested in the challenges actually presented by each of the sexes, and the foibles.
Yeah, when I was reading the book, I'm doing this on the fly, so bear with me if this makes no sense. But as I was reading, I was thinking about Haruki Murakami, who I'm a huge fan of, and one of the ways I became really in love with him was I felt like he had this way of writing about. He often wrote about narrators who would see women who felt like they had not been seen by the rest of the world, which I thought he did so beautifully, and it was one of the ways I really sort of fell in love with him as a writer. And I thought about him as I was reading your book, because I thought of Rina, and your work with Rina reminded me, it was the first time I had seen that same or similar type of person character, but from the woman's point of view. And it struck me as, I loved it. That was this beautiful dance it was doing in my literary brain with the sort of male version from Haruki Murakami, and then reading Rina through your writing was so lovely. I don't know that I have a question about that exactly, but just like writing about, is it hard, I'll rather than do a question, is it hard to write about someone so introverted, so not seen, seemingly unseen by the world around her?
Yes, it was. It was very hard, and it goes back to our discussion about narratives and how we define ourselves and present ourselves. You know, what if there is a total breakdown in how we define ourselves and then how we are perceived? And I love that you mentioned Haruki Murakami. I adore his work too, and I'm very interested in this, in the presentation of women, and I really wanted to do it from the female perspective, actually. And it was quite interesting because Rina is very obviously depressed, and I think anyone who's experienced depression and the kind of alienation of oneself from the rest of the world will understand her position when they meet her in the novel. And it's really, you know, all of the different ways in which we can deal with depression, combat depression, and overcome it. You know, what is the way out? How do you become happy with yourself and your own narrative? How does that align with how you're presenting to the world and how you want to be perceived? But even just to the far more important and core value of being happy, being true to yourself, quite outside external presentation. I think in the world today, part of the narrative is set in the 90s, and very, you know, that was very intentional on my part because I'm rather allergic to social media and the constant external physical presentation of the self that occurs today. So yes, I was really interested in.
Lots to say about that last comment about social media, but we'll do that later over a Zoom drink or something.
Okay.
Okay, I don't want to override too many other people's questions. I did have, one of the things I am curious about as I read was kind of early on in the story, maybe a third of the way through, maybe a little sooner, we get, the daughter gets the autopsy report of what happened to the mothers. I'm not spoiling anything, just so you know, readers. I was very curious what it was like to write that. One, how was it to write at? I'm guessing you read many real autopsy reports to get the flow of how that worked. But I'm curious also from a narrative and structural point of view, in the writing of it, I assume there's like, were there constraints? Did you have to reveal a certain amount, but not too much? I'm just curious how that dance was, because I was fascinated by it.
It's a really great question, because you're quite right. I've read an alarming number of autopsy reports, and often in bed at night, you know, my husband's still with me, our marriage is really strong. Yes, they're very long, actually. They're very long and remarkably dull in their presentation and the way in that they're written. You know, the emphasis on facts. And I did actually read a couple of forensic textbooks as well, just to try and understand the procedures. And I also spoke to doctors who would perform autopsies, or particularly doctors in training. I think it's a crucial part of early doctor training, and just just to get the details, I suppose, the tactile physical sensations. What was very interesting to me is that defense attorneys in Japan, part of their training is to be present during autopsies. So, which was very interesting to me. It's from the medical perspective, but also that they fully understand what has happened to the victim. And it really made an impression, quite obviously, on a lot of them, who, you know, they then, from that point on, they started to take all of their cases and the crimes extremely personally. And it resulted in a great deal of self-reflection. And so Sumiko also does that when she's reading the autopsy. But yes, I had to create a very concise document that read realistically, but was not a 20-page block of, you know, bodily fluid and measurements. Sorry.
Yeah, no, don't be sorry. That's what an autopsy report is. And it was done so, and it works. Like you did a gorgeous job, because it is both filled with story, which any autopsy report is anyway. You can't help but fill in the why or the how, you know? Yeah. So no, it was, as I was reading it, I was like, oh, this would be tricky to do. I think actually would be harder than it seems like it would be.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So, okay, I don't want to override. Let's see. So we have a question about visiting, the lyrical descriptions of place and also food. How long did you live in Japan, and how did place and food influence your writing?
Well, I'm Singaporean, and I grew up in Singapore, and food is really the unofficial religion there. It's all we talk about. When I brought my husband, who's British, home to meet my family, he was astounded by the fact that we'd be having lunch and then actively discussing what we would have for dinner. And so it's a very central part of life. And I suppose actually as well, you cannot be Singaporean and grow up in Singapore without an awareness of the Second World War and the Japanese occupation. And this is something that my Asian family, my Indian Singaporean family experienced themselves a great deal. You know, they were in the Malaysian Peninsula when the Japanese cycled down to take the peninsula in Singapore. And my grandmother actually, she befriended a Japanese soldier and she taught him English. And both of my Singaporean grandparents were fluent in Japanese, and you had to be during the occupation. So, so I grew up very much with a kind of immersion. My grandmother was a lawyer, and she worked with many Japanese clients throughout her life. She was actually made an honorary member of the Japanese club in Singapore. And she, I mean, it's quite, her reaction, I think, her reaction to her experiences during the war was quite extraordinary and very different to my British family, who also fought the Japanese in the Second World War. And were far more reluctant to talk about it, and certainly had a great deal more trouble recovering or assimilating their experiences and getting over it. And so to answer your question, I spent time in Japan over several years. I didn't spend entire years there because I had a job and a husband and a life, and I couldn't just decamp. But I did spend time researching there over several years, and I also have family members with homes in Japan who lived there. So I guess it was a mixture of bringing my own experience and the experience of my close friends, and so many of the wonderful women I met who, while working on this novel, who really gave me an insight into what it's like to be a woman in Japan at the moment, and how so many of the constraints they face are faced by all of us around the world. I was really interested in that. But yes, it was a mixture of friends, personal experience, family, and then the research that I undertook itself.
Yeah. And they are asking specifically about visiting Hokkaido and Shimoda, and are those places that you spent some time?
Yes, I mean, particularly I love the coastal areas of Japan, and I really loved spending time in Shimoda. It was really wonderful to be there. And again, I think it can be quite difficult to travel. Well, not difficult to travel in Japan, but there aren't so many tour services, I think. So what the local population have done in response to that is that they have their own tourism groups, which are these really lovely local organizations, and you can contact them, and they will spend time with you and show you around their hometown and tell you the things that they love about it, and the generosity, and I think the the willingness to communicate and the enthusiasm actually was what I really valued so much about traveling, because it can be quite alienating and strange to travel on one's own, you know, particularly when you're working on a project such as this one. And you know, we mentioned actually that the wakaresaseya industry is covert and perceived as quite strange. It can be quite difficult when that is your opener. I'm writing a book about this. But people are extremely generous and very open and very interested, and so I'll be eternally grateful for that.
Yeah. And do you go back? Do you plan to go back? Do you have relationships there now that you?
Oh yes, yes, I would love to. And actually, a friend sent a picture of the novel on sale in Tokyo, which was really spectacular, the English edition. I would absolutely love to go back there. And actually my godchildren are Japanese. One of my best friends, Sumiko, is Japanese, and the main character is absolutely named for her. And she was the first person I ever spoke to about this novel. And she was so enthusiastic and encouraging from the get-go. And I adore her children. Takumi and Sayuri, my godchildren, they are wonderful. So yes, I really hope that we can all go back to Japan soon. And Sumiko's family they are incredible. And I love them very much. So yeah, I would love to travel again. Go away, COVID, go away.
I know, you and everyone. My daughter, I have a 6-year-old, and she has a sign she put on her window that just says, "Virus, go away." And that's it. We just left it up because I feel like everyone feels the same way.
I know, absolutely. Yeah, my God, Sayuri is 7. It's a lovely age.
Yeah, it's so simple. Like, just go away. Can you just go
away? Yeah.
So, okay, let's see. So there's a question about the legal procedure that's talked about in the book, and how there are 3 judges, and this procedure is, you know, it's super interesting to watch it unfold. Is that how all legal procedures are done, or is it because it was a murder case that it was done that way?
This is a very interesting question. So the trial and the legal procedures take place in the 1990s. So that system that's described in the book has since changed. Now there is a jury system in place. At the time when the crime takes place in the novel, there are 3 judges, a panel of 3 judges, and there is no jury. But all of the interrogation procedures they're very true to life, particularly in the 90s. The reason I'm pausing is because I'm just recalling actually that interrogations weren't taped commonly in the 90s. They were occasionally taped, but now there is a great focus on recording and taping all interrogations. Prosecutors have a great deal of freedom and power in the system. And so one of the latest introductions is actually a recording of all interrogations.
Okay. And so someone is asking about talking about the sugar mamas, sugar daddies, and sugar babies thing in Japan. Do you want to?
Yes.
Okay.
I guess I would like more information.
Okay, good. I was thinking the same thing, and I thought, well, Stephanie will know.
Because
okay.
I mean, I guess sugar people exist everywhere, but in terms of honey trapping, it's very much a paid setup. I mean, I think there is also a business in Japan where you can hire friends and family to come with you to social functions, weddings, etc., and make you look good, which is quite interesting. I mean, okay, I've just seen, is the culture of the sugar baby okay in Japan? I mean, I think that's a very complex question. And it's very, very difficult because there's also the culture of kawaii and cuteness and femininity and various gendered forms that women are encouraged to fit into or step into, and some choose to fit into. So there's a great deal of, I can't really say whether it's okay or not, because it's so incredibly varied, depending on who chooses to embrace it or function within it or subscribe to those views or not. You know, is sugar, you know, is the sugar baby culture okay in the West? Is it okay in the UK or America? I don't know. What do you think?
Yes. I'm just going to go with yes. Yes, that's an interesting question.
Well, people are fantastic in their variety.
Yes.
And endlessly fascinating. So, you know, very hard to come to concrete conclusions.
Yes, and nothing but wonderful fodder if you are a writer. Because,
yes.
Yeah, there is no end to the incredibly strange, wonderful, terrible, beautiful things that people do on a regular basis. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Fascinating humanity.
I know. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you. Your book is just delightful. I deeply encourage everyone to go out and buy a copy and read it. And it just grapples with the core questions of what it is to be a human being. You know, who am I? Who are you? Who are we to each other? It's just a delight to read, and I'm so happy for you, and I wish the book nothing but wonderful success and lots of readers and deeper empathy and all the good things that come out of reading. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Margaret. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for your really interesting questions. This has been a really fun discussion. I've absolutely loved it, so thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill, for turning it over.
Oh, thank you. And thank everyone for joining us at this Powell's event. It was a pleasure to host Stephanie Scott and Margaret Malone. Please consider buying a copy of Stephanie's book, What's Left of Me Is Yours, by visiting us at powells.com. And while you're there, please be sure to check out our lineup of other upcoming virtual events. And we look forward to seeing you at another one of our events again soon. Stephanie, Margaret, that was great. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.